Commander Zefkara stood before the massive viewing portal of the Galactic Council's flagship, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger as their fleet approached. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, almost beautiful with its swirling white clouds and vast oceans. But Zefkara knew better than to trust appearances. Every species in the known galaxy had heard the legends. Stories passed down through generations, whispered in the dark corners of space stations, told around the fires of colony worlds. Tales of a race so violent, so utterly savage, that they had been banished to a remote corner of the galaxy thousands of cycles ago. The humans. "Sir," came a trembling voice from behind him. Lieutenant Vextai, his communications officer, approached with obvious reluctance. "We're receiving multiple transmissions from the planet's surface. They claim to be peaceful." Zefkara's 4 eyes narrowed. Of course they would say that. The legends spoke of human cunning almost as much as their brutality. They were said to be master manipulators, capable of convincing their victims to lower their defenses before striking with overwhelming force. "What do our sensors tell us about their military capabilities?" Zefkara asked, his scaled hands gripping the railing. Science Officer Quindal looked up from her console, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy. "That's just it, Commander. We're detecting very few military installations. Some orbital platforms, yes, but nothing that should concern a fleet of our size. It's strange. Strange indeed." The Galactic Council had assembled the largest armada in recorded history for this mission. 3,000 ships from 40 different species, each one armed with the most advanced weapons technology available. They had come expecting to face the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever known. Instead, they found what appeared to be a barely spacefaring civilization. "Perhaps the legends were exaggerated," suggested Tactical Officer Morgen, his rocky features showing skepticism. "It has been 3,000 cycles since the last confirmed human contact. Stories have a way of growing in the telling." Zefkara wanted to believe that. The logical part of his mind agreed that legends often became distorted over time. But there was something in his genetic memory, something deep and primal, that screamed warnings whenever the word human was mentioned. Every species in the council felt it. Even a mighty Thraknari, warriors who feared nothing in the known galaxy, spoke of humans in hushed, terrified whispers. "Incoming transmission from the lead diplomatic vessel," Vextai announced. "Ambassador Krelvoth wishes to speak with you." The holographic image of Ambassador Krelvoth materialized before them. The elderly Zelanian's usually composed demeanor seemed strained, his gill slits fluttering rapidly in what Zefkara recognized as extreme anxiety. "Commander," Krelvoth began, his voice tight, "I've just finished reviewing the historical records one more time. The accounts are disturbing. According to the archives, humans were not merely violent. They were described as beings who could not be reasoned with, who showed no mercy to the defeated, who seemed to take pleasure in causing suffering." Zitkara nodded grimly. He had read the same accounts. The War of the Burning Stars, they called it. A conflict so devastating that it had nearly torn the young Galactic Council apart. The humans had appeared seemingly from nowhere, with ships that defied conventional design and weapons that operated on principles the Council's best scientists couldn't understand. What made it worse was that humans seemed to fight not just with technology, but with a viciousness that went beyond military necessity. Survivors of human attacks reported that the creatures would continue fighting even when mortally wounded, that they would sacrifice themselves to inflict maximum damage on their enemies, that they seemed to enjoy the act of warfare itself. "There are records," Krelvoth continued, "of humans boarding Council ships not to capture them, but simply to engage in hand-to-hand combat. They would fight until every last one of them was dead, taking as many Council members with them as possible. It was as if they valued the act of violence more than victory itself." The bridge fell silent. Everyone present had heard these stories, but hearing them again while staring at the human homeworld made them feel more real and more terrifying. "And yet," Quindal said quietly, "our sensors show a world at peace." were detecting agricultural installations, what appear to be educational facilities, medical centers. If these are the same creatures from the legends, where are their weapons? Where are their warships? Maybe that's exactly what they want us to think, More Jin rumbled. The ultimate deception. Make us believe they've changed, grown peaceful, and then strike when our guard is down. Zethkara considered this. It would be a very human thing to do, according to the legends. They were said to be masters of psychological warfare, capable of planning strategies that span generations. Perhaps this entire peaceful facade was part of some elaborate trap. Commander, Vextai interrupted, we're receiving another transmission from the planet. This one is different. Different how? It's not coming from their government. It's from someone calling themselves a historian. They claim to have important information about our arrival. Zethkara exchanged glances with his officers. This could be a trap, but it could also be valuable intelligence. Put them through, but maintain all defensive screens. The image that appeared was unlike anything Zethkara had expected. The creature was bipedal, as the legends described, but far smaller than he had imagined. Its skin was pale and soft-looking, its frame seemingly fragile. This was one of the monsters that had terrorized the galaxy. Greetings, the human said, and its voice was calm, almost gentle. My name is Dr. Sarah Chun. I'm a historian specializing in the period your records probably call the War of the Burning Stars. The bridge crew exchanged nervous glances. How did this creature know about their records? I know why you're here, Dr. Chin continued. You've come because the legends say we're monsters. You've assembled this massive fleet because you believe we pose a threat to galactic peace. I understand your fear, and I want to help you understand the truth. Zethkara found his voice. What truth would that be, human? The truth about what really happened 3,000 years ago. The truth about why your ancestors were so terrified of us. And the truth about what we've become since then. The human paused, and something in its expression made Zethkara's blood run cold. You see, Commander, the legends you've heard about us aren't false. If anything, they don't tell the whole story. But you've made one critical error in your understanding of human nature, which is, you assume that because we were monsters then, we must still be monsters now. You assume that our capacity for violence is unchanging, fixed. You don't understand what we're truly capable of. The human's expression grew sad, almost pitying. The creatures your ancestors fought weren't monsters because we enjoyed violence. We were monsters because we were desperate, cornered, fighting for our very survival against forces we didn't understand. Dr. Chun gestured to something off-screen. What your legends don't tell you is that we were refugees when we first encountered the Council. Our original homeworld had been destroyed by forces beyond our control. We were scattered, frightened, trying to find a place to rebuild our civilization. When Council ships found us, we thought we had found salvation. But, according to our records, you attacked without provocation, Zethkara protested. Your records are incomplete, Dr. Chin replied. The first human ships that encountered Council forces were carrying civilians. Families, children, elderly. We tried to communicate, but there were language barriers, cultural misunderstandings. Your forces interpreted our refugee ships as invasion craft and opened fire. The bridge was silent. This was not in any of the historical records Zethkara had read. When news of the attack reached the other human ships, we did what any species would do when their civilians are slaughtered. We fought back. But we fought back with the desperation of a dying race, with nothing left to lose. The human's eyes seemed to look directly at Zethkara. That's what made us so dangerous. Not inherent evil, but the absolute determination that comes from having everything stripped away. Even if that were true, Morgen interjected, it doesn't excuse the brutality of your methods. No, it doesn't, Dr. Chin agreed. We became exactly what your legends say we were. Vicious, relentless, seemingly inhuman in our capacity for violence. We fought until we were exhausted, until our numbers were so reduced that we couldn't continue. And when the war ended, when we were banished to this remote system, we had a choice to make. What choice? We could remain the monsters that circumstances had made us, or we could become something better. The human smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. We chose to evolve. Zethkara felt a chill run through his body. Evolve how? That, Commander, is what you're about to discover. Your fleet is impressive, by the way. 3,000 ships. It's actually larger than the force that drove us here originally. But I'm afraid you've made the same mistake your ancestors did. What mistake? You've assumed that the humans of today are the same as the humans of 3,000 years ago. You've planned for a war against the monsters from your legends. Dr. Chin's expression grew serious. But we're not those monsters anymore. We're something far more dangerous. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Sir, Vextai said, his voice barely above a whisper, long-range sensors are detecting movement throughout the system. Ships are emerging from what appear to be empty space. Zethkara spun to face the tactical display. Where moments before their sensors had shown nothing but empty space, thousands of contacts were now appearing. Not ships in any conventional sense, but something else entirely. They seemed to phase into existence, as if they had been hiding in dimensions the Council's technology couldn't even perceive. How many, he asked. Quindal's tentacles were now writhing frantically as she worked her console. I can't get an accurate count. They're not showing up consistently on any of our sensor arrays. It's as if they exist and don't exist at the same time. Impossible, Morgen rumbled. No technology can hide an entire fleet. Unless, Zethkara said slowly, the legends were wrong about more than just human motivations. What if their technological capabilities were also underestimated? Another transmission came through, this one from the human government's official channels. Council Fleet, came a new voice, calm and diplomatic. This is Admiral Marcus Webb of the Human Solar Defense Force. We've monitored your approach and understand your concerns. Dr. Chen has briefed us on your conversation, and we'd like to invite a diplomatic delegation to the surface for talks. Zethkara stared at the tactical display, watching as more and more impossible contacts appeared around his fleet. They weren't taking aggressive positions, but they were clearly demonstrating capability far beyond anything in the Council's understanding. Admiral, Zethkara replied, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. Our records indicate that humans are not to be trusted. How do we know this isn't a trap? The response came with what sounded like genuine amusement. Commander, if we wanted to destroy your fleet, we wouldn't need to lure you into a trap. The fact that you're still alive right now should tell you something about our intentions. The implications of that statement hit Zethkara like a physical blow. The human was right. If they possessed the technology to hide entire fleets from Council sensors, they could have attacked without warning. The fact that they were offering diplomacy instead suggested either genuine, peaceful intent or a level of confidence so absolute that they didn't consider the Council fleet a threat at all. Neither possibility was particularly comforting. We'll send a diplomatic shuttle, Zethkara said finally. But our fleet will remain at full alert. Of course, Admiral Webb replied. We wouldn't expect otherwise. We'll provide coordinates for a secure meeting location. And, Commander, bring your best historians and xenobiologists. You're going to want to understand exactly what you're dealing with before you make any decisions about humanity's future. As the transmission ended, Zethkara found himself facing a terrible realization. The Council had come here prepared to fight monsters. But monsters, as terrifying as they were, could be understood, predicted, defeated through superior force or clever tactics. What they were facing now was something far worse than monsters. They were facing a species that had transcended their monstrous nature and become something entirely new. Something that could hide entire fleets in plain sight, that could project power across the galaxy without being detected, that could choose mercy when they clearly possessed the strength to simply take what they wanted. The legend spoke of humans as monsters. But the reality was far more drastic indeed. They had become something that the Galactic Council had no framework for understanding, no protocols for dealing with, no hope of controlling. As Zethkara prepared for what might be the most important diplomatic mission in galactic history, he couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's evolution from monsters into something greater was about to reshape the entire balance of power in the galaxy. The only question was whether the Council would survive the transition. The diplomatic shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere with unprecedented sensor readings flooding the Council delegation's instruments. Ambassador Krelvoth sat rigid in his seat, his gill slits fluttering as he processed the impossible data streaming across his displays. "The atmospheric composition is wrong," muttered Dr. Yathura, the Council's leading xenobiologist. Her crystalline form sparkled with nervous energy as she cross-referenced the readings. "According to our historical records, Earth should be barely habitable. The humans were supposed to be struggling with resource depletion, environmental collapse. These readings show an atmosphere that's not just stable, but optimized." Commander Zethkara studied the planet's surface as they broke through the cloud layer. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about human civilization. Vast cities sprawled across the continents, but they weren't the cramped, industrial wastelands he had expected. Instead, towering spires of what appeared to be living crystal reached toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float without any visible support. Between the urban areas, forests and grassland stretched as far as the eye could see, but even these natural spaces showed signs of careful management and enhancement. "Those structures," whispered Dr. Velnari, the team's leading physicist, "they're impossibly tall. The materials science alone to support buildings of that height should be beyond any civilization we've encountered. And the power requirements to maintain those floating connectors would be astronomical. Unless they've learned to manipulate fundamental forces in ways we haven't even theorized about," Krelvoth replied grimly. Their destination became visible as they approached, a complex that seemed to have grown rather than been built. The landing pad was formed for what looked like shaped stone, but sensors indicated it was somehow both organic and mineral, harder than diamond yet warm to the touch. As their shuttle settled onto the platform, the delegation could see gardens and water features that defied conventional physics, with streams flowing upward in spirals and trees whose leaves seemed to capture and redirect light in impossible ways. Waiting for them was a group of humans, but they weren't at all what the Council members had expected. The delegation had prepared to meet with fierce warriors, battle-scarred veterans who might have retained some echo of their ancestors' monstrous nature. Instead, they found themselves facing beings who looked almost ethereal. The humans were tall and graceful, their movements fluid and precise. Their eyes held depths of intelligence and compassion that seemed to see right through to the soul. Dr. Sarah Chun stepped forward, flanked by Admiral Webb and several other officials. But it was the figure standing slightly behind them that made Krelvoth's breath catch in his throat. An elderly human woman, her hair white as starlight, her presence radiating a kind of quiet authority that made the ambassador instinctively want to bow. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Chin said, her voice carrying easily across the landing pad despite its gentle tone. "I'd like you to meet Elder Sarah Okafor, one of our guiding council members. She's here because what you're about to learn will require the wisdom of someone who lived through our transformation." Elder Okafor stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in the council members' bones. "Honored delegates, we know this visit is difficult for you. Your people carry genetic memories of fear passed down through generations. That fear is not unfounded. What you're afraid of was real. But understanding what we were requires understanding what drove us to become what we are now." The delegation was led through corridors that seemed to pulse with life. The walls weren't merely decorated. They were alive, covered with patterns that shifted and flowed like gentle currents. Bioluminescent vines provided lighting that adjusted automatically to the comfort levels of each species present. The air itself felt different, charged with potential that made their instruments hum with barely contained energy. How is any of this possible? Dr. Velnari asked, unable to hide his scientific curiosity despite his fear. That's precisely what we want to show you, Admiral Webb replied. But first, you need to understand the journey that brought us here. Elder Okafor, would you share the story? They were led into a vast chamber whose ceiling opened to the sky, though somehow the temperature remained perfect despite the exposed air. Comfortable seating arranged itself around them, literally growing from the floor to accommodate each species' unique physiology. As they settled in, Elder Okafor began to speak. 3,000 years ago, when your ancestors drove us to this system, we were indeed monsters, she began, her words carrying the weight of absolute honesty. Not by nature, but by circumstance. We had become so consumed by survival, so twisted by loss and desperation, that we had forgotten what it meant to be truly human. Holographic displays appeared around them, showing scenes that made the council members recoil in horror. Images of the ancient war, but from a human perspective. They saw refugee ships burning in space, families torn apart by weapons that turned living tissue to ash, children crying over the bodies of their parents. This is what drove us to become monsters, Elder Okafor continued, her voice steady despite the horrific images. When everything you love is destroyed, when every attempt at peace is met with violence, when your very existence is threatened, you have two choices. You can die quietly, or you can become something terrible enough to fight back. The images shifted, showing the humans as the Council's ancestors would have seen them. Creatures who fought with impossible ferocity, who seemed to feel no pain, who would sacrifice 10 of their own to kill one enemy. But now the Council could see the context, the desperate courage that drove seemingly ordinary beings to extraordinary acts of violence. We became monsters from your legends because we refused to die, Elder Okafor explained. But when the war ended, when we were exiled here, we faced a choice that would define us for millennia to come. We could remain monsters, raise our children to be monsters, perpetuate the cycle of violence that had consumed us. Or we could find another way. How? Krelvoth asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How do you come back from that kind of transformation? Very slowly, Elder Okafor replied, and at great cost. The first generation after the war, my great-great-grandmother's generation, they were broken. They had survived, but they were hollow shells of what humans once were. They knew they couldn't continue as monsters, but they didn't know how to be anything else. The holographic displays showed early human settlements on Earth, crude structures hastily erected by a traumatized population. The humans in these images looked haunted, their eyes carrying the weight of what they had done and what had been done to them. They made a decision that shaped everything that came after, Elder Okafor continued. They decided to dedicate their lives not to rebuilding human civilization, but to creating something entirely new. They called it the Great Work. The Great Work? Dr. Yithera asked. Dr. Chin stepped forward to explain. The idea was revolutionary. Instead of trying to return to what humans had been before the war, or accepting what we had become during it, they chose to evolve. Not just technologically, but fundamentally. They wanted to become a species that was incapable of falling into the same traps that had made us monsters. New images appeared, showing the early attempts at transformation. Humans working with genetic material, but not in the crude way the Council might have expected. This was science that approached the level of art, delicate manipulations that seemed to enhance, rather than replace, natural human capabilities. They started with empathy, Admiral Webb explained. The ability to truly understand and share the experiences of others. They found ways to enhance human mirror neurons, to create neurological pathways that made it literally painful to cause unnecessary suffering to others. But that was just the beginning, Elder Okafor added. They realized that true change required more than biological modifications. It required a complete restructuring of how humans thought about existence itself. The council delegation watched in fascination as the displays showed the development of what could only be described as a hybrid of science and philosophy. Humans working with quantum mechanics not just to build better machines, but to understand consciousness itself. Biology and psychology merging with physics and mathematics to create entirely new ways of being. We learned to see connections where others saw separations, Dr. Chun explained. The boundaries between self and other, between organic and mechanical, between matter and energy began to blur. Not because we lost our individuality, but because we gained perspective. The result, Elder Okafor continued, was a species that retained all of our capacity for strength and determination, but channeled it in entirely different directions. We became capable of incredible feats, not of destruction, but of creation. As if to demonstrate, Elder Okafor gestured toward the wall. The council members watched in amazement as the living surface began to reshape itself, forming into a complex sculpture that seemed to capture the essence of each delegate's homeworld. The detail was perfect, down to the unique atmospheric phenomena and native flora of planets the humans should never have seen. How did you know? Dr. Velnari whispered, staring at a perfect representation of the crystal formations from his home planet. Because understanding others became central to who we are, Elder Okafor replied simply. When empathy is enhanced to the level we've achieved, learning about other species isn't just scientific curiosity. It's a fundamental need. The implications were staggering. The council had come here expecting to face monsters, but instead they were encountering beings who had evolved beyond the capacity for the kind of monstrous behavior they feared. Yet somehow, that made them seem more dangerous, not less. This is all very impressive, Krelvoth said carefully, but it doesn't address our primary concern. You say you've evolved beyond violence, but what guarantee do we have? What stops you from reverting to your old nature if circumstances change? The question hung in the air for a moment. Then Elder Okafor smiled, and the expression was both beautiful and terrifying in its absolute confidence. That, Ambassador, is exactly the right question to ask, she said. And the answer is going to reshape everything you think you know about power in this galaxy. Would you like to see what we're truly capable of now? Dr. Chin activated a new display, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with images that defied comprehension. Stars being moved from their courses not through brute force, but through subtle manipulations of space-time that required no more energy than lighting a candle. Worlds being terraformed not through massive industrial processes, but through careful guidance that helped planets evolve naturally into garden paradises. Life itself being fostered and guided across entire solar systems. This is what the monsters became, Admiral Webb said quietly. Not gods, not conquerors, but gardeners on a cosmic scale. We learned to nurture rather than destroy, to build rather than tear down, to create beauty where once we created only horror. The council delegation sat in stunned silence as the full implications began to sink in. The humans hadn't just evolved beyond their monstrous nature. They had become something that made their old capacity for violence seem primitive by comparison. They had gained the power to reshape reality itself, but had chosen to use that power for creation rather than destruction. The question now, Elder Okafor said, her voice gentle but firm, is what the Galactic Council wants to do with this knowledge. You came here to eliminate a threat. Instead, you've discovered a species that could be the greatest ally you've ever had, or the greatest force for change the galaxy has ever seen. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. We're not asking to rejoin the galactic community as it exists now. We're offering to help the entire galaxy evolve to something better. The choice is yours, but understand this. We've moved beyond the need for your approval or permission. We're offering partnership, not because we need it, but because we think you're ready for it. The silence that followed was deafening. The council had come here with the power to destroy a world. Instead, They found themselves facing a species that could reshape the entire galaxy and was offering to share that power with those wise enough to accept it. The only question now was whether the Galactic Council was ready for the kind of evolution that humanity was offering to share. The Council delegation spent 3 days on Earth, and each revelation shattered their understanding of reality more completely than the last. What they had initially dismissed as impossible was gradually revealed to be merely the surface of human capabilities. On the second day, Dr. Velnari was granted access to human research facilities. What he found there left him questioning everything he thought he knew about physics. The humans had learned to work with dimensions that Council science could barely theorize about. They manipulated matter at the quantum level not through crude force, but through what they called dimensional harmonics, essentially convincing particles to behave differently by changing the fundamental frequencies of reality around them. "We don't force matter to change," explained Dr. James Park, one of the human researchers. "We simply help it discover what it wants to become. Everything in the universe has potential forms, alternative expressions of itself. We've learned to guide those transitions." As if to demonstrate, Dr. Park gestured toward a block of ordinary stone. Before Dr. Volnari's amazed eyes, the stone began to shift and flow, its molecular structure reorganizing itself into what appeared to be living wood, then crystal, then back to stone again. But the transitions were seamless, natural, as if the material was simply exploring different aspects of its own nature. "Impossible, Dr. Velnari whispered. The energy requirements alone should be enormous. You're violating fundamental conservation laws." "We're not violating them," Dr. Park replied with a smile. "We're working with deeper laws that your science hasn't discovered yet. When you understand that consciousness and matter are aspects of the same phenomenon, when you realize that observation doesn't just measure reality, but participates in creating it, the apparent violations become elegant harmonies." Meanwhile, Dr. Ythera was discovering equally disturbing truths about human biological capabilities. The humans had indeed modified themselves, but not in the crude, genetic manipulation way she had expected. Instead, they had learned to work with what they called consciousness-guided evolution. "We don't change our DNA directly," explained Dr. Maria Vasquez, the lead biological researcher. "We create environments where our cells naturally evolve toward desired states. Consciousness, properly focused and directed, can influence genetic expression in real time. We've essentially learned to evolve intentionally and rapidly." To demonstrate, Dr. Vasquez showed Dr. Ythera recordings of humans adapting to different environments. A human explorer preparing for a high-radiation mission would spend time in meditation chambers, focusing their consciousness on cellular resistance patterns. Within hours, their bodies would begin producing enhanced protective proteins, their cells reorganizing to better handle radiation exposure. "It's not just physical adaptation," Dr. Vasquez continued. "We can enhance mental capabilities, emotional resilience, even social compatibility. A human preparing to work with a new alien species will often spend time learning not just their languages and customs, but adapting their own neurological patterns to better understand alien thought processes." The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just overcome their monstrous nature. They had gained the ability to become whatever they needed to be in any given situation. They could adapt to any environment, understand any species, overcome any challenge through conscious evolution rather than technological tools. But it was Ambassador Krelvoth who discovered the most unsettling truth about human capabilities. On the third day, he was invited to witness what the humans called a confluence, a gathering where multiple human communities across the solar system connected their consciousness to share information and make collective decisions. The experience was unlike anything in Krelvoth's long diplomatic career. As the confluence began, he could sense the presence of thousands of human minds linking together, not through technology, but through enhanced psychic abilities that the species had developed over centuries of evolution. "We don't lose our individuality," Elder Okafor explained as the process unfolded around them. Instead, we expanded. Each person remains themselves, but they also become part of something larger. Imagine having access to the memories, skills, and wisdom of thousands of others while still maintaining your own perspective. What Krelvoth witnessed defied everything he understood about consciousness and identity. The humans in the confluence moved and spoke with perfect coordination, but it wasn't the mechanical unity of a hive mind. Instead, it was like watching a symphony where each instrument maintained its unique voice while contributing to a harmony greater than the sum of its parts. The decision before us today, announced one of the confluence participants, concerns our response to the Galactic Council's visit. We must choose how much of our true capabilities to reveal and whether to offer active assistance to their evolutionary development. What followed was a discussion that spanned multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Krelvoth could perceive only fragments of what was being communicated, but he sensed vast currents of thought exploring possibilities he couldn't even imagine. The humans were considering not just the immediate diplomatic situation, but the long-term consequences of their decisions across multiple timelines and probability matrices. We have foreseen 17 different potential futures arising from this moment, another participant stated. In 12 of them, the council species successfully evolved beyond their current limitations and join us in gardening the galaxy. In 3, they reject our offer, but remain neutral and peaceful. In 2, they attempt to use force against us and must be neutralized for the safety of all life. Krelvoth felt his blood turn cold. The casual way the humans spoke of neutralizing the Council's military force suggested capabilities beyond imagination. And the fact that they were apparently considering multiple timelines meant they possessed some form of precognitive ability. What would neutralization involve? He asked, dreading the answer. Elder Okafor turned to him, her expression sad but determined. We would not harm your people, Ambassador. We no longer possess the capacity for such actions, but we would render your weapons inoperable, disable your faster-than-light capabilities, and isolate your species within your current territories until you evolve beyond the need for violence. That would doom us to stagnation, Krelvoth protested. Without expansion, without access to new resources, our civilizations would eventually collapse. No, Elder Okafor replied gently. They would be forced to evolve. Scarcity and competition drive technological development, but abundance and cooperation drive consciousness development. Your species would learn to work together, to share resources efficiently, to find satisfaction in growth rather than expansion. It will be difficult at first, but ultimately liberating. The confluence continued for several hours, with participants discussing scenarios and possibilities that stretched Krelvoth's understanding to its limits. The humans weren't just considering the current situation. They were planning for the evolutionary development of the entire galaxy over timescales that spanned thousands of years. As the confluence concluded, a decision was reached. The humans would reveal more of their capabilities to the council delegation, but they would also issue what amounted to an ultimatum. The Galactic Council had one standard year to demonstrate measurable progress toward evolving beyond their current limitations. If they showed genuine effort to develop along the lines humanity had pioneered, they would receive active assistance and guidance. If they rejected the offer and attempted to maintain the status quo, they would be isolated until they were ready to evolve. If they attempted to use force against humanity, they would be prevented from doing so by methods they wouldn't understand until it was too late to matter. This isn't a threat, Elder Okafor explained to Krelvoth as the other humans dispersed. It's simply an acknowledgement of reality. The galaxy has reached a point where evolution is no longer optional. Species that refuse to grow beyond violence and competition will find themselves increasingly unable to function in the new reality we're helping to create. That evening, as the delegation prepared for their return journey, Dr. Sarah Chun provided them with a final demonstration of human capabilities. She led them to an observation deck where they could see the entire solar system laid out before them. "What you're looking at," she explained, "isn't what your sensors detected when you arrived. We've been showing you only what we wanted you to see. Would you like to observe what's really here?" The view shifted, and suddenly, the solar system was revealed to be far more populated than any of the council members had imagined. Massive structures orbited every planet, but they weren't crude space stations or military installations. They were living cities, grown rather than built, inhabited by humans who had adapted to life in space through conscious evolution rather than technological life support. The asteroid belt had been transformed into a garden of crystalline structures that processed solar energy and cosmic radiation into forms that could support life. The gas giants were surrounded by cloud cities where humans had learned to exist as energy beings when necessary, their consciousness maintaining coherence even when their physical forms were dispersed across thousands of cubic kilometers of atmosphere. Most unsettling of all were the structures in the outer system, vast constructions that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions the Council couldn't even detect. These facilities were clearly designed for purposes beyond the Council's understanding, possibly for travel to other star systems or even other realities. "We've been exploring the galaxy for over 1,000 years, Dr. Chen revealed. Not through conquest or colonization, but through observation and gentle guidance. Most species never realize we visited them. We study, we learn, and, when appropriate, we plant seeds of ideas that help civilizations develop along more positive paths." The implications were staggering. The humans have been influencing galactic development for centuries, possibly millennia. Every major breakthrough in council technology, every social reform, every step toward peace between hostile species might have been subtly guided by human influence. "You've been manipulating us," Krelvoth said, his voice tight with anger and fear. "We've been nurturing you," Dr. Chun corrected gently. "Just as a gardener doesn't force plants to grow, but creates conditions where they can flourish naturally. Every choice your species made was genuinely yours. We simply helped ensure that the information and opportunities you needed to make positive choices were available when you were ready for them." As the delegation's shuttle prepared for departure, Admiral Webb provided them with a data crystal containing what he described as introductory materials for species interested in beginning their own evolutionary development. "The information on that crystal represents about 1% of human knowledge," he explained. "It's enough to get started, but progress will depend on your species' willingness to let go of old assumptions about the nature of reality and consciousness. The journey we've taken isn't easy, but it's the most rewarding thing any species can undertake." As their shuttle lifted away from Earth and rejoined the Council fleet, the delegation sat in stunned silence. They had come expecting to face monsters and instead had encountered gods, or beings so far beyond their own development that the difference was academic. The choice now facing the Galactic Council was perhaps the most momentous in its history. They could attempt to maintain their current way of existence, knowing that humanity would eventually isolate them for their own good and the safety of other species. They could reject humanity's offer and try to fight beings who could manipulate reality itself. Or they could accept that their entire understanding of existence was fundamentally limited and begin the terrifying but necessary journey toward conscious evolution. As Krelvoth looked out at the human fleet that had remained hidden until now, thousands of vessels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, he realized that the age of the Galactic Council, as it had existed for millennia, was ending. The only question was whether it would evolve into something greater or simply fade away as an obsolete remnant of a more primitive era. The humans had given them a year to decide. Looking at the data Crystal Admiral Webb had provided, Krelvoth wondered if that would be anywhere near enough time to understand what they were truly being offered. The return journey to the Council's primary assembly world took 3 weeks, and every day brought heated debates among the fleet commanders and diplomatic corps. The data crystal provided by the humans had been studied by every expert they could gather, but its contents raised more questions than they answered. The information within wasn't technological specifications or scientific formulas, as many had expected. Instead, it contained what could only be described as philosophical frameworks, meditation techniques, and consciousness exercises that seemed designed to gradually expand a reader's understanding of reality. Most disturbing of all, the crystal seemed to adapt its contents to each individual reader, presenting information in ways that challenged their specific limitations and preconceptions. Commander Zethkara found himself spending hours each day studying the materials, drawn by a fascination he couldn't entirely explain. The human concepts of consciousness-guided evolution weren't just theoretical. They included practical exercises that seemed to produce measurable effects on those who practiced them. Sir, Lieutenant Vextai reported during one of their daily briefings, "We're receiving concerning reports from across the fleet. Personnel who have been studying the human materials are reporting enhanced sensory capabilities, improved problem-solving abilities, and in some cases, what can only be described as precognitive flashes." Dr. Quindal looked up from her own copy of the crystal's contents. "I've experienced it myself," she admitted. "The exercises they provide for consciousness expansion actually seem to work. I've been able to predict system failures hours before they occur, and my understanding of quantum mechanics has increased dramatically." But it wasn't just individual enhancement that was occurring. As more crew members practiced the human techniques, they began reporting experiences similar to what they had witnessed during the confluence on Earth. Small groups of practitioners found they could share information and coordinate activities with an efficiency that bordered on telepathy. The changes weren't limited to the delegation that had visited Earth. Reports were coming in from across the fleet of spontaneous insights, enhanced empathy between different species, and a growing sense of unity that transcended traditional species boundaries. "It's happening too fast," reported Chief Medical Officer Thrandau during an emergency meeting of senior staff. "Biological and neurological changes that should take generations are occurring in a matter of weeks. Personnel are reporting expanded neural pathways, enhanced mirror neuron activity, and, in some cases, the development of entirely new brain structures." The implications were both exciting and terrifying. The human knowledge was apparently designed to accelerate the evolutionary process, but no one understood the full consequences of such rapid change. When they finally reached the Council homeworld, they found chaos waiting for them. Word of the human encounter had somehow preceded their arrival, and the entire galactic community was in upheaval. Some species were demanding immediate military action against what they saw as an unprecedented threat. Others were calling for the complete abandonment of current council policies and immediate adoption of human guidance. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's history. Representatives from over 200 species packed the Great Assembly Hall, their voices raised in arguments that ranged from fearful demands for preemptive strikes to desperate pleas for human intervention in long-standing conflicts. President General Korthvac, the Council's current leader, called for order with limited success. The aged Vulcarians' usually commanding presence seemed diminished in the face of the crisis they were confronting. "The floor recognizes Ambassador Krelvoth," he announced, and the hall gradually fell silent. "Please provide your report on the human encounter." Krelvoth approached the central podium, acutely aware that his words might determine the fate of galactic civilization. He began with a straightforward account of what the delegation had observed, but as he spoke, he could see the reactions of his audience growing more extreme with each revelation. When he described the humans' ability to manipulate matter through consciousness, several military representatives began frantically taking notes. When he explained their precognitive capabilities and dimensional technologies, the scientific community erupted in excited chatter. And when he revealed that humans have been subtly influencing galactic development for centuries, the hall exploded into outraged shouts and demands for action. "Order!" President General Korthvac called, but his voice was lost in the chaos. It was then, that something unprecedented happened. The 100 or so council personnel who had been studying the human materials suddenly stood in perfect unison, their movements so coordinated that it silenced the entire hall. When they spoke, their voices were perfectly synchronized, creating harmonics that resonated through the chamber. "The time for debate has ended," they said as one. "The transformation has already begun." The hall fell into stunned silence as everyone stared at the synchronized speakers. These were representatives from dozens of different species, yet they moved and spoke as if controlled by a single mind. "We are not controlled," the synchronized group continued, apparently responding to the thoughts of their observers. "We are connected. We have tasted the unity that the humans offer, and we cannot unknow what we have learned." President General Korthvac found his voice. "What are you saying? Have you been compromised by human influence?" The group turned toward him with expressions of infinite patience. "We have been enhanced by human knowledge. We see now what the galaxy could become if it chose evolution over stagnation. The old ways of competition and conflict are ending whether we resist or embrace the change." Dr. Velnari, who was among the synchronized group, stepped forward to address his colleagues directly. "The humans were correct about one thing," he said, his voice carrying new harmonics that hadn't been there before. "Evolution is no longer optional. The universe itself is changing. Consciousness is expanding throughout the galaxy, and species that refuse to grow will find themselves increasingly isolated from the new reality." To demonstrate his point, Dr. Velnari gestured toward one of the chamber's quantum displays. The sophisticated device, which normally required complex inputs and calculations, began responding directly to his thoughts, showing probability matrices and dimensional calculations that existed only in his enhanced consciousness. "This is impossible," protested General Thraknor, one of the military hardliners. "You're violating the fundamental principles of how consciousness interfaces with technology." "We're demonstrating new principles," Dr. Velnari replied. "Principles that the humans discovered millennia ago and are now sharing with us. The question is whether the rest of the council is ready to learn them." The debate that followed lasted for days, but it became increasingly clear that the changes were spreading regardless of official decisions. Personnel throughout the council who had any contact with the human materials were reporting enhanced abilities and expanded consciousness. More importantly, they were beginning to demonstrate capabilities that defied conventional understanding. Ships throughout the fleet began reporting navigation systems that seemed to guide themselves toward optimal destinations. Medical facilities discovered that treatments became more effective when practitioners focused their consciousness on healing intentions rather than purely technological interventions. Even diplomatic negotiations between traditionally hostile species began producing unprecedented breakthroughs as negotiators developed enhanced empathy and understanding. But it was the arrival of the Thraknari battle fleet that brought the situation to a crisis point. The Thraknari were the Council's most militaristic species, genetically engineered warriors whose entire culture revolved around concepts of strength and dominance. When news of the human encounter reached their homeworld, they had immediately dispatched their most powerful battle group with orders to eliminate the threat. General Thraknor, who had taken command of the fleet against direct orders from the Council leadership, brought his forces out of hyperspace in full battle formation, weapons charged and shields raised. "By the authority of the Thraknari Warrior Code," he announced, "I declare humanity to be an existential threat to galactic order. This fleet will proceed to Earth and eliminate the threat permanently." The Council's own defense forces moved to intercept, but they were vastly outgunned by the Thraknari war machines. A shooting conflict between Council species seemed inevitable, exactly the kind of chaos that would justify humanity's concerns about the galactic civilization's readiness for evolution. That was when the humans chose to intervene directly. The first sign of their presence was the gradual shutdown of weapons systems throughout both fleets. Not through technological interference, but through what could only be described as the weapons themselves choosing not to function. Power cores remained active, shields stayed up, but every weapon designed to cause harm simply stopped working. Then, Admiral Marcus Webb's voice came through every communication system simultaneously, reaching every ship regardless of their comm settings or technological compatibility. "General Thraknor," the human said, his tone carrying the authority of someone who wielded power beyond imagination. "You are demonstrating exactly why your species isn't ready for the responsibilities that come with cosmic awareness. Your weapons are disabled not through force, but through the simple fact that the universe itself no longer supports their function in this region of space." The general's response was a stream of warrior oaths and demands for battle, but his words seemed to fade away even as he spoke them, as if reality itself was choosing not to acknowledge his aggression. "The Thraknari culture has many admirable qualities," Admiral Webb continued. "Your courage, your loyalty, your dedication to protecting what you value. These are traits that could serve the galaxy well if channeled toward creation rather than destruction. We're prepared to help your species discover those possibilities." What happened next demonstrated human capabilities that went far beyond anything the Council had imagined. The Thraknari fleet, thousands of massive warships designed for system-wide devastation, began to transform, not through external force, but through changes that seemed to originate from within the ships themselves. Weapons systems reorganized themselves into manufacturing facilities. Armor plating shifted into hull configurations designed for exploration rather than battle. Most remarkably, the crews began reporting enhanced cognitive abilities and emotional states that allowed them to see beyond their traditional warrior programming. "This is an abomination," General Thraknor declared, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "You're changing the fundamental nature of my people." "We're revealing the fundamental nature of your people," Admiral Webb corrected. The Thraknari capacity for protection and service was always there beneath the artificial programming that turned you into weapons. "We're simply helping you rediscover what your species was meant to become." Within hours, the entire Thraknari fleet had undergone a transformation that redefined their purpose from conquest to exploration and protection. Their crews, freed from the neurological conditioning that had locked them into warrior roles, began discovering interests and abilities they never knew they possessed. General Thraknor himself underwent perhaps the most dramatic change. As his enhanced consciousness began to perceive the connections between all living things, his warrior's instinct to protect became focused not on defeating enemies, but on nurturing and defending the potential for growth throughout the galaxy. "Understand now," he said, his voice carrying new harmonics of wonder and compassion. "We were never meant to be destroyers. We were meant to be guardians of evolution itself." The transformation of the Thraknari fleet sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. If the humans could effortlessly convert the Council's most militaristic species into willing participants in their vision of cosmic evolution, then no force in the known galaxy could stand against them. But perhaps more importantly, it demonstrated that human intervention wasn't about conquest or control. It was about helping each species discover and fulfill their highest potential. The Thraknari hadn't been destroyed or enslaved. They had been liberated to become something greater than they had ever imagined possible. As news of the transformation spread, the remaining opposition to human guidance began to crumble. Species throughout the galaxy began requesting access to human knowledge, eager to discover their own potential for conscious evolution. The age of the old Galactic Council was ending, but something far greater was beginning to take its place. The question was no longer whether humanity would reshape galactic civilization, but whether the galaxy's species were ready for the kind of cosmic responsibility that such evolution would bring. 1 year later, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Ambassador Krelvoth stood on the observation deck of what had once been the Council's primary command station, but which now served as the central hub of something called the Galactic Consciousness Collective. The structure itself had grown rather than being built, shaped by the combined will of hundreds of species working together through enhanced awareness and shared purpose. Through the transparent walls, he could see representatives from across the galaxy engaged in activities that would have been impossible under the old system. Thraknari warriors worked alongside delicate Etherian philosophers, their enhanced empathy allowing them to understand each other's needs and perspectives with perfect clarity. Crystalline Velnari shared quantum consciousness space with gaseous typhonic cloud beings, their different forms of existence no longer barriers to communication and cooperation. Most remarkably, conflicts that had raged for millennia had simply ended, not through military victory or diplomatic treaties, but because the enhanced consciousness that now spread throughout the galaxy made it impossible for beings to harm others without feeling that pain themselves, or hadn't been outlawed. It had become literally unthinkable. "Remarkable, isn't it?" came a voice behind him. Krelvoth turned to CDR. Sarah Chan approaching, though she looked significantly different from the human he had met on Earth. Her form seemed more flexible somehow, adapting itself to be more comfortable for his species' visual perception. When she moved, reality seemed to shift subtly around her, suggesting capabilities that had grown far beyond what she had demonstrated during their first encounter. "I'm still not entirely certain what's happened to us," Krelvoth admitted. "The changes came so quickly, were so fundamental. Are we still the same species we were a year ago?" Dr. Chun smiled, and her expression carried depths of compassion and understanding that seemed to encompass entire civilizations. "You're more yourselves than you've ever been," she replied. "What you've lost are the artificial limitations and false beliefs that prevented you from expressing your true nature. What you've gained is the ability to become everything your species was always capable of being." As if to illustrate her point, Krelvoth watched a group of younglings from various species playing together in a nearby chamber. Their game involved manipulating light and shadow to create shared virtual environments that all of them could experience simultaneously, regardless of their different sensory capabilities. A year ago, such cooperation between species would have required complex translation technology and careful diplomatic protocols. Now it was as natural as breathing. "The children adapt fastest," Dr. Chen observed, following his gaze. "They have fewer preconceptions to overcome, fewer fears to release. In another generation, the galaxy will be populated by beings who can't imagine the old limitations." The transformation hadn't been uniform across all species. Some, like the warrior Thraknari and the analytical Velnari, had adapted quickly to their enhanced capabilities. Others, particularly species with rigid hierarchical societies, had struggled more with the transition to collective consciousness and empathic awareness. But even the most resistant species had eventually found their own path to evolution. The hierarchic dominion, whose entire culture was based on strict caste systems and authoritarian rule, had discovered that their organizational skills translated beautifully into coordinating galaxy-wide projects for the benefit of all species. Their natural talent for structure and order now served to help other civilizations organize their own evolutionary development. "What about those who couldn't adapt?" Krelvoth asked. He knew there had been some species, particularly those whose biology or psychology made empathic enhancement difficult or impossible, who had chosen isolation rather than transformation. "They're waiting," Dr. Chen replied simply. "Isolated in protected regions, where they can continue developing at their own pace until they're ready for contact with the enhanced galactic community. Humanity learned long ago that forced evolution is just another form of violence. Every species must choose their own path, even if that path is slower than others would prefer." Through the observation deck's quantum displays, Krelvoth could monitor activities throughout the galaxy. What he saw would have been impossible under the old Council system. Entire star systems were being transformed into garden worlds, not through massive terraforming projects, but through conscious cooperation with planetary consciousness itself. Dying stars were being gently guided into new forms of existence that could support life for billions of additional years. Even the fabric of space-time was being subtly enhanced to support higher forms of consciousness and more efficient travel between distant worlds. How far does this extend? He wondered aloud. Are humans making these changes throughout the universe? Humans are one part of a much larger pattern, Dr. Chen explained. What you're seeing isn't human expansion or conquest. It's the natural evolution of consciousness itself. The universe has reached a point where awareness is becoming self-directing, where the distinction between observer and observed is breaking down in productive ways. She gestured toward a display showing the local galactic cluster. Similar transformations are happening in other galaxies, guided by species that evolved along similar paths to humanity. Some began their journey millions of years ago and have capabilities that even we find difficult to comprehend. Others are just beginning their evolution and look to us for guidance, just as we once looked to our predecessors. The implications were staggering. The transformation of their local galaxy wasn't an isolated event, but part of a cosmic evolution that spanned the entire universe. Consciousness itself was evolving, and species that participated in that evolution gained access to capabilities that seemed godlike to those still operating under older limitations. What's humanity's role in all this? Krelvoth asked. We're gardeners, Dr. Chen replied, using the same term Elder Okafor had used during their first meeting. We help other species discover their own potential for growth. But we're also students still learning from those who evolved before us, and from the new perspectives that each newly awakened species brings to the collective consciousness. As they spoke, Krelvoth became aware of a subtle shift in the space around them. Other beings were joining their conversation, not physically, but through the enhanced consciousness networks that now connected most of the galaxy. He could sense the presence of Thraknari philosophers, Etherian artists, crystalline mathematicians, and dozens of other species, all contributing their perspectives to the discussion. The experience was overwhelming at first, like trying to listen to hundreds of conversations simultaneously. But his enhanced awareness quickly adapted, allowing him to perceive the discussion as a rich symphony of ideas and insights rather than chaotic noise. This is how all major decisions are made now, Dr. Chen explained, sensing his amazement. No single species or individual has the wisdom to guide galactic development alone. But when hundreds of enhanced consciousnesses work together, considering problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously, solutions emerge that no one could have discovered in isolation. The collective consideration that Krelvoth was experiencing focused on humanity's next phase of development. The species that had once been monsters, then gardeners, were preparing for another evolutionary leap that would take them beyond physical existence entirely. Some humans are choosing to transcend individual form altogether. One of the Thraknari contributors explained through the link. They're becoming pure consciousness, able to exist as distributed awareness throughout space-time itself. Others are exploring forms of existence in dimensions we can barely perceive. But they're not abandoning us, added an Etherian voice full of musical harmonies. They're establishing the foundation for the next phase of cosmic evolution, preparing the way for other species to follow when they're ready. Krelvoth sensed the vast scope of what was being planned. The enhanced galactic civilization was itself just a stepping stone towards something even greater. Species throughout the universe were evolving toward forms of existence that would eventually allow consciousness to transcend physical reality entirely, to become active participants in the fundamental forces that shaped existence itself. Where does it end? He asked through the collective link. The answer came from Dr. Chun, but it carried the wisdom of countless species and the perspective of beings who had already transcended physical limitations. It doesn't end, she replied. Evolution is eternal. There's always another level of understanding to reach, another form of existence to explore, another way to express the infinite potential of consciousness. But Doesn't that make our current lives meaningless? Krelvoth wondered. If we're just stepping stones to something greater? The response came as a wave of gentle amusement from the collective consciousness. Does a flower become meaningless when it produces seeds? Dr. Chen asked. Does a parent's love become less valuable because children eventually become independent adults? Each stage of evolution is beautiful and valuable in itself, while also contributing to something greater. As the collective discussion continued, Krelvoth began to understand the true scope of what humanity had offered the galaxy. It wasn't just enhanced capabilities or peaceful coexistence. It was participation in a cosmic process that transformed existence itself, that turned individual beings into active collaborators in the universe's ongoing creation of itself. The monsters from the legends hadn't become gods, as he had initially feared. They had become something far more wonderful and terrifying. They had become fully realized expressions of what consciousness could achieve when freed from the limitations of fear, competition, and isolation. And now every species in the galaxy had the opportunity to join them on that journey. Looking out at the transformed galaxy, where former enemies worked together to nurture new forms of life and consciousness, where individual limitations have been transcended without losing individual identity, where the universe itself was becoming a more beautiful and harmonious place, Krelvoth finally understood the true meaning of what Elder Okafor had told him during their first meeting. The legends had spoken of humans as monsters, and that had been true. But reality was far more drastic than anyone had imagined. The monsters had become gardeners. The gardeners had become transcendent beings, and transcendence itself was just another step in an evolutionary journey that would continue forever. As Krelvoth felt his own consciousness beginning to merge with the galactic collective, experiencing the joy and wonder of existence from thousands of different perspectives simultaneously, he realized that he was no longer the same being who had arrived at Earth in fear and anger just 1 year ago. He was something far greater. He was a conscious participant in the universe's endless journey toward ever greater expressions of beauty, love, and understanding. The age of monsters was over. The age of conscious evolution had begun, and it would never end.